So this is the 9th talk in this series of talks on the Buddha, and this one is called Awkward Customers. So human nature doesn't seem to have changed a great deal in 2,500 years. It's easy for us to have a quite romantic picture, a rosy view of what it must have been like to be around the Buddha, his great disciples. And certainly there were many people whose lives were changed by just a few words from the Buddha, by a brief encounter, a significant meeting. But there's also many who seemed indifferent to him, and others who were actually antagonistic. And we hear of some of the Shramanas, the wanderers, who actually got jealous of the Buddha and his disciples, their popularity of the monks and nuns, just in terms of the food that they would be given and support and they were given, and did what they could to discredit and undermine him. And some people actually went out of their way to make trouble for the Buddha. There was a Brahmin in Savatthi, the city of Savatthi, who was known as Contradictor, and he was called Contradictor because he was always arguing with people. Whatever people said, he said the opposite. If they said long, he said short, and so on. He was always out for an argument. So he decided he'd show up the Buddha. He thought, I'll visit him and enter into discussion with him, and whatever he says, I'll say the opposite. We'll soon find out how holy he really is. So Contradictor went to the Jeta Park where the Buddha was staying, and he saw him walking up and down mindfully, as he often did. So he went and walked alongside the Buddha. And then at a certain point he said, "Give me a teaching, monk." The Buddha stopped. He turned. He gave Contradictor his elephant look. It's said when an elephant gives someone its attention, it turns not just its head, but its whole body. So the Buddha turned. He met Contradictor with his whole being, and he said to him, No, Contradictor. There's no teaching for you. With your twisted heart, so full of anger and hatred, you'll not be able to hear me, to think clearly, to enter into honest discussion. Only a person who's overcome ill will in his heart and given up all enmity will be able to recognize the truth when they hear it. Contradictor was caught completely off his guard. This was not what he'd expected. He'd wanted to provoke an argument, to have a good fight. Instead, he found himself suddenly shaken to the core of his being as the Buddha's words struck home. And with a shock of recognition, he saw all so clearly what he'd been doing for so many years with his endless arguing and unpleasantness. Something broke in him. He could no longer go on in that way, remorseful, recognizing he had to change his ways. He opened his heart to the Buddha and asked to be accepted as a lay disciple. So another story of someone who went along to pick an argument with the Buddha. And this story gives us a sense of the Buddha's gentle irony and sense of humour in dealing with someone who sought to confront him. So the Buddha was staying at a place called Varanja with a band of disciples, and a Brahmin called Udaya had heard many criticisms of the Buddha from his fellow Brahmins, and he came to visit him. There was the usual exchange of polite pleasantries, but once that had been done, it became immediately clear that Udaya had come to put the Buddha in his place. Master Gautama, I've heard it said that you do not pay proper respect to old and venerable and learned Brahmins, and I've seen for myself that that's true. This is not the way to behave, Master Gautama. He was trying to give the Buddha a bit of a telling off. The Buddha's response was supremely confident. Brahmin, there is no one in this whole world who's worthy of the respect of an enlightened one. If a Buddha were to pay deference to anyone, their head would probably split wide open. The Brahmin Udaya could not believe what he was hearing. Master Gautama has no taste. Well, there is a sense in which it could be said I have no taste, for I have no taste for the world of the senses. But that's surely not what you mean. Ha! Master Gautama has no sense of values. Well, there is a sense in which you could say I have no sense of values because I attach no value to the world of the senses. But surely that's not what you mean. Master Gautama teaches passivity. Well, there is a sense in which you could say I teach passivity, for I teach that one should be passive in the face of provocation or temptation, and not go along with evil actions of body, speech and mind. But that's surely not what you mean. Master Gautama teaches nihilism. Well, there is a sense in which you could say I teach nihilism, because I teach the annihilation of greed, hatred and delusion. But that's surely not what you mean. Master Gautama teaches rejection. Well, there is a sense in which you could say I teach rejection, because I teach the rejection of all evil actions of body, speech and mind. But that's surely not what you mean. Master Gautama teaches destruction. Well, there is a sense in which you could say I teach destruction, for I teach the destruction of greed, hatred and delusion. But that's surely not what you mean. Master Gautama teaches mortification. Well, there is a sense in which you could say I teach mortification, because I teach the mortification of all actions rooted in greed and hatred and delusion. But surely that's not what you mean. So we get the impression that Udaya had a sense that the Buddha taught a very negative, nihilistic, hopeless sort of teaching from what he's saying. Master Gautama teaches rebirth. Master Gautama rejects rebirth. Well, there is a sense in which you could say I reject rebirth. Having completely freed myself from all the defilements, I will never need to be born again in a womb. But surely that's not what you mean. The Brahmin's anger was spent. He had no more to say, and he remained silent. Seeing this, the Buddha said, "Can I ask you a question now? So if a hen was to carefully incubate a clutch of eggs, and a chick breaks out of one egg before all the others, using its beak to get through the shell, would you call it the oldest or the youngest? Well, obviously, the oldest. In just this way, the world is encased in a shell of ignorance, and I was the first to break through, so I can be called the elder brother to the world." And he went on to describe enlightenment and the unfoldment of his enlightenment as like breaking through successive shells and eventually to complete liberation. So he taught, and as he taught, the Brahmin's heart softened. He found himself opening gradually to the Buddha, taking in more and more of his words, coming to see more and more clearly who the Buddha really was. He was won over. Something deep shifted in him. He joyfully declares, Master Gautama is indeed the elder brother of the world. He is indeed the best of men. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. It's as if something has been set upright that was overturned. Something uncovered that was hidden. It's as if a lamp has been brought into a room that was dark, so all can now see clearly. Master Gautama has made the truth very clear to me. I go for refuge to the Buddha. I go for refuge to his teaching and to his community from this day and for the rest of my life.